awfulness of the Civil War is perhaps only matched by the awfulness of the aftermath of the Civil War. Reconstruction is one of the most contentious items, issues, and identifications of United States history. It was a time period in which all of the problems of the Civil War come forward and are not solved by the American political system. And you, as a historian, have to be able to answer what the true nature of Reconstruction was in order to have any understanding of this time period, of any understanding of what happened in the United States during that time period. Recognize that issue. What is the true nature of Reconstruction? Because on the one hand, Southerners look and say, unmitigated evil, destroying the very fabric and liberty of us as a country. And on the other hand, Northerners say a failed opportunity to actually provide that which we fought in a war and lost 600,000 men about, and that is freedom for black people in America. So in order to get to that answer, in order to be a historian on the issue, what you have to be able to do is go forward and say what took place. Now, Reconstruction actually starts before the war ends. And that's because Abraham Lincoln, to his credit, is already thinking about how that will play out after we've defeated the South. And that's Lincoln's plan. And you have to know Lincoln's plan was an easy and quick way of bringing the South back in. The conditions, 10% of the population of a state would swear an oath of allegiance to the nation, and the state would come back in. That's quick, easy, good, and raises the issue of how you deal with retribution. Do you seek retribution on those who have wronged you, wronged your country? And Lincoln's solution was very clearly to do that, to allow those people back in, to not seek retribution. Now, immediately upon that, the Congress, filled with more fervent potential Republicans, fervent anti-slavery types, people who hated the South more, said, no, we want a Wade Davis bill. And in 1864, those Republicans introduced into Congress that bill which demanded 50% of the population not only swear the oath of allegiance, but also say we will go along and say the 13th Amendment abolishment of slavery is there as well. Now, potentially the most significant event in American history was the election of Abraham Lincoln, because he got us through the war, but most certainly his assassination does us extraordinary damage. We lose the master politician. We lose the man with the ability to guide us through this potentially awful time period, fraught with peril and problems, and he's dead. So we have his plan out there, we have the Wade Davis plan out there, and then we have perhaps the second worst president of the United States ever, Andrew Johnson, a semi-literate drunk who's only on the ticket, who's only there for the 1864 election to get Southern ex-Democrats to vote for Lincoln. And unfortunately, Lincoln's assassination leaves this man in charge of the nation, and he's less than competent, less than able to deal with the circumstance he faces. He proposes a plan that seemingly is very similar to Lincoln's, but in actuality is much different, because it requires Southerners, anybody in power who had been part of the Confederacy, to come north to Washington, D.C., to seek him out personally and to ask for forgiveness. Once that forgiveness is given, then they get to be part of Southern society. And what you see in 1865 on, is this incredible exodus of Southerners who had once run the Confederacy, going to Johnson, kissing his feet, asking for forgiveness, and then regaining power in their states down south. Now, why would Johnson have this addition to Lincoln's plan, the 10% plan, plus the 13th Amendment? He wants them to pay fealty to him. He's ignorant, he's not well-to-do, and all of these Southern people have to come to him. So what we have is a plan that works to bring them back in, these Southern states, but that does extraordinary damage, because who's sitting in power in these states part of the United States in 1865, those very people who had been secessionists, who had led the Confederate States against the Union. And what we see then is what we call black codes. And those black codes are those southern states reimposing slavery after slavery's been banned. The 13th Amendment very clearly says you cannot impose slavery upon a human being in the United States of America. What we have in the South are southern states essentially taking the old slave codes, rewriting the word slave to black worker, and changing those into ways of subjugating blacks. Clearly states' rights, power, and action against the federal government's 13th Amendment. Very clearly southern states reimposing social, economic, and political slavery upon the freed men of the South, and very clearly allowed by Johnson, because all he wants is their little admission of defeat to him, their kissing of his feet, and they get to go back in power. So by 1865, we have a re-emergence of slavery in the South, despite the fact the Freedmen's Bureau, the one attempt by the federal government to bring freedom and opportunity to blacks, is operating down south. And so what we have at that point in time is this contest in the South. Are blacks going to be free or not? Are we going to find fruition for the effort and purpose of the Civil War for African Americans in the South? And by the end of 1865, marching to Washington, D.C. to take power in our national legislature are those very individuals who had run the South. And the Northerners say, we didn't lose these men, we didn't fight this war, we didn't sacrifice for this time to allow these Confederates to come back in. They are barred. And what we have is an enormous fight by the end of 1865 over what will happen in the South. Now, Johnson just doesn't say, hey, kiss my feet, you're back in. He actively stops the Northern attempt to bring freedom to African Americans. And he vetoes the Freedmen's Bill. And the Freedmen's Bill is very clearly that which is the one attempt by the North to help blacks in the South: economic opportunity, education, and potentially some kind of assistance. Very infrequently does it go beyond education. Very infrequently does it go beyond immediate assistance. We do not give to blacks, we do not give to freed men that which we could have and potentially should have. The 40 acres and a mule is done so infrequently in the South after the Civil War that it's the exception to the rule. And this now contest, Johnson's saying, hey, they're back in, hey, they have representation, they can do whatever they want to blacks, is met with, in Congress with the Republicans, a civil rights bill. That civil rights bill is still on the books, it still can be used legally, and it's there in March of 1866 to say, we're going to protect black people in the South. Now, that will eventually become an amendment to the Constitution. So when you see Civil Rights Act of 1866 translated into 14th Amendment, we've had the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. The civil rights for African Americans is now translated into the 14th Amendment. And what we'll see is a contest for the remainder of 1866. That contest is for the midterm elections, as we know. Halfway in the presidential term, you have a midterm election, and Johnson, stupidly, drunkenly, and badly, goes out on the stump saying, vote for my candidate, vote for my guy, because I want Reconstruction done in my way. Well, we're not going to vote for you, Andrew Johnson. You're, again, semi-literate, semi-drunk, and not very intelligent when you're out on the stump, and it's a resounding defeat for any middle-of-the-road candidate. What happens in the midterm elections is that Congress turns radical. Because of the tussle between the President Johnson and the Congress, Republican, that Congress becomes radicalized. And so by the end of 1866, you don't have moderates in the Congress. You have radical Republicans who have taken control, who know what they want to do with Reconstruction, and know Johnson stands in the way. The radical Republicans can be easily characterized by Thaddeus Stevens in the House of Representatives, brilliant member, absolutely fantastic leader of